Welcome to the show, everybody. Michael with CoronaVirusDiaries, and today I'm fortunate enough to be able to reconnect with Luis Gabriel Aguilera, an artist, a teacher, and a social justice activist out of Chicago. Luis, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you, Micah?
I'm doing great, all things considered.
Right.
So it's been a little while since we've connected. There's been a lot of changes that have happened in the last few weeks. In Chicago, Minneapolis, and globally. In fact, right now we're in the middle of what a lot of people are calling the largest civil rights movement in recorded history. I'm curious, let's just jump right into it. This is current events. And, before we started this, we dug into a little bit about, the narrative of, what's next, making change, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts, kind of just go into what it's like in Chicago right now and what you're kind of seeing developing around you politically, socially, in your own community.
Okay, so I think one thing we need to do is we need to step back just a little bit to see the bigger picture. And so originally what I had seen happen in Minneapolis was a very organic movement in the first couple of days. And then when we started to see those agent provocateurs getting on the scene, which we spoke about then and also recently, that's when I find that there's a weak spot then in the protest, in the movement itself. So going back to my days at the University of Chicago, we took a power and identity course over the course of a full year, 3 quarters. And we came up with this, really, really interesting way of sort of understanding divide and conquer tactics. Sure. And so it's basically this, I came up with the understanding of the 4 C's. The first one being codification, the second one being compartmentalization, the third one being cooptation, and the fourth one being commercialization.
The fourth one is in addition.
In addition. Yeah, now in the modern era, because after the cooptation, folks now want to just make money off of these movements.
It's kind of an elevator pitch. Do you mind stepping through those 4 C's?
Right, absolutely. So like for codification, you get to know, and I'll give you a really, really simple example. You get to know the lingo of the streets. So someone, say, wants to infiltrate your group. They get to know how you speak, what your ideas are, that sort of thing, and they get to be your buddy, so to speak, right?
Donnie Brasco action up in here.
Right. And then the next phase after that is compartmentalization, where you break up the social structure of whatever that movement or group is that you're trying to infiltrate. And so you break it up, you compartmentalize it, and then so you're able to then define it in those perimeters. And then comes the cooptation, where you actually start using the language in the way that you want to manipulate in your own fashion.
You're leveraging.
The leveraging, and then being able to gear it in towards the agenda that you want for the infiltration process to be complete. And then finally we have in the modern era commercialization. So you have these fine little Che Guevara cups now that are selling for $20-$30 that have nothing to do with the revolution, right? Has everything to do with commercialization and exploitation of a movement. So I'm beginning to see a little bit of that on top of what else is going on.
It's what I've been seeing in my own network. One, it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? You look at social media; it's a fast way. It's a real-time generate collectives and like-minded people and these movements. You see what happened with Arab Springs. That was a lot of social media. That was groups banding together, realizing, hey, there's you're not alone, and then pushing for a major change. The concern that I am seeing, though, is that there's a rapid polarization of people that can kind of group themselves as an identity, like they have this identity, and then there's this extreme polarization and this huge divide that just springs up. And unfortunately, a lot of times it'll become this left versus right, the red versus blue kind of ideologies that are driving or driving the divide even, as opposed to finding that middle ground, and it's
Well, let's step
unfortunate.
back. Let's step back with that.
Sure.
So there's something really powerful about national unity around a social justice issues that needs to be tended to. We just recently had the LGBT community was given or not given, but I mean they won an incredible situation yesterday with the Supreme Court, deciding that their workers would be, what was that again?
There was an equality. I briefly saw it. I've actually been trying to stay away from the news, but I did see
Right.
there was some changes that were made for the LGBTQ community in terms of equality for the workplace.
Right, exactly. And so that's huge when you have a national unity around a social justice issue like that. But then we get back to the idea that all politics are local, right? So the divisions occur because people tend to forget that what it's going to work in Chicago isn't necessarily going to work in Minneapolis,
Right.
isn't necessarily going to work in Saugatuck, Michigan, and is not going to work in Taos, New Mexico. So people tend to forget these things. So they want to, in their minds, folks want to have this huge narrative for everyone, a one size fits all.
Yeah.
Typical American thinking, right?
The
A one size fits all.
compartmentalization
A compartmentalization of the whole thing. And so while you have folks on the ground and between each other divided and quote unquote conquered at that point on various issues, on the minutia of certain movements, you have then the mainstream media, the legacy media, and the powers that be who have all right and who have all they have all the resources and all the power, and they have the discipline, but they also have the uniform vision of what it is they want.
Yeah.
So that's where they're just on that leverage game alone they win, because we tend to then start fighting over these little things here and there, and that's how it kind of works out.
Yeah, and that plays right into another element we were talking about, which is dividing and distracting, and there's a lot of that happening right now.
Right.
There is on just so many different playing fields, and that's really, I'm working on a project right now for this channel that I'm calling The Great Divide, and it's kind of playing on it, this narrative that I was 5 to 6 blocks, depending on how you calculate the riots, where the point of entry was, away from Midway in St. Paul. The difference for me versus my cousin, who was 2 blocks north, was that I had Highway 94, or a major intersection divide, where it didn't really go too much south. There was a little bit of stuff that kind of happened, some robberies, and there's some weird stuff happening now, but by and large, it was all north and then east and west along that university, that channel. But also the divide of, even people that are outside the city looking in, saying, they saw the injustice that happened, the excessive force, the execution of George Floyd, and
Right.
said, it's necessary. This needs to happen. It was outrage, right? People couldn't believe what they're seeing. Some people could because they've been living it, right? My friends,
Right.
people of color, they're like, yo, we're just lucky that there was a video, because otherwise this would have just been another unarmed black man getting murked in the streets. So there was a lot of folks saying, hey, this is necessary, but there's this divide in that it's not their gas station that's getting burned down. It's not their pharmacy or their grocery store. Their communities, they're literally, the irony is that they're saying this is necessary. Some people I know actually were suggesting that burning the businesses was necessary. They were business owners. And I'd say, okay, well, why don't we burn your business down? And it's like, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, but I strongly believe that, in the event that somebody was about to gas their business, they would probably try to stop them, because where's the income coming from once it's burned? The insurance ain't going to go through right away. They're going to burn through their savings. It's really easy for people to make these blanket statements and, yes, to some extent.
Well, let's stop right there. I think it goes back to a lapse of information for every individual. right? We've all experienced our life in our own way, and your life is different than my life, and we know this, right?
Yeah.
So one thing that we can do to sort of resolve that is maybe getting folks on the same page. Now, for instance, that 13th documentary that is on
Heavy.
Netflix and on YouTube, it's heavy,
Yeah.
but it's opened the eyes of people who otherwise had no idea that this was going on, and did not see the totality of it over the hundreds of years that this has been going on. And
Yeah.
so now they're getting to see it. Now they're on the same page. We can start disseminating more information about what social injustices are occurring, and how they're manifesting themselves, and how they've been manifested themselves over the course of decades, if not hundreds of years. And by putting out that information, people could get a sense of, oh, this is why they're angry. I didn't know. In my own bubbled insular life, I had no idea that it was that bad, but it is, right? So I think that's one way to do that, right?
Back to the disconnect, we talked about disconnecting, like people are starting to disengage, disconnect. I'm doing it a bit myself, just because it's, every single day, you got the mainstream media that's just, a lot of times you'll look and they've all got the same headline, which is kind of interesting. But, I'd spoken with another individual that was talking about, if you just disconnect from this huge global thing and look locally, you can actually be happy with your family, your friends,
of course.
And for some people, and that's again back to this idea of like compartmentalizing this. I mean, it is.
Yeah, but that's a temporary safety.
Yeah.
Now hold on, let me ask that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what happened in the last 40 years with the middle class. The middle class has been crushed, and it's slowly evaporating even faster now. Why? Because neoliberalism came through with their policies and started crushing them little by little. So these folks who thought they were safe, or didn't even care to think about what's going on at the very, very extreme ends of the poverty line.
I'm not so sure about the neoliberalism, and I would have to really dig in.
It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work for you to look at it.
I see it as business. I see.
Well, yeah, but that's
there's always this bottom line that is looking to leverage, and that's why a lot of business leverages places where workplace equality, and there's people that are
well with neoliberalism. The thing about that makes it very special, and versus saying capitalism or hyper-capitalism, is that it has as a genuine agenda to corporatize our lives, which is very different than privatize our lives. Corporatize our lives means that, for instance, in public education, we want to create a model of public education that creates these cogs in the wheels versus a critical thinking, holistic individual. And so the corporatization it's geared towards just one thing, which is a capitalistic lifestyle, a materialistic lifestyle. And so that's why that neoliberal thing that started being introduced in the 80s with Ronald Reagan and Thatcher, that's what's kind of been running this whole game for the last 40, 50 years.
I like the route of education for this, and I'd like to kind of go this way a little bit.
Right.
Because in my own humble opinion, I think more than anything is, shifting finances, whether it's from a pretty significant budget that has been allocated for law enforcement towards more education and community based stuff. Education could do a lot. There's a TED Talk. I want to say it was Sir Robinson.
But education for who?
Really quick. So the education bit. There's a gentleman that did a TED Talk on education, Sir Robinson, Sir Charles Robinson, I believe, could be wrong. But if you just search Sir Robinson TED Talk, you'll find it. And what he basically pushed was the cog in the wheel narrative for education, specifically just the K through 12 type of schooling, where it's you study a lot to memorize things to do specific tasks, as opposed to thinking about how to do things differently or to develop differently. And it's an interesting concept that, one, education is typically smash pretty early on in like the budget cuts. Arts, especially, I'm an artist and a creative, much like yourself. And it's unfortunate, or it's a bummer whenever you see, the arts, music, painting, whatever.
Languages.
Yeah, languages getting chopped. Where those a lot of times the arts are what help drive, science and, business, and they just are a new way of viewing things. And so I like the education route of,
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I get to speak to a lot of CEOs and VPs and folks like that in the business world, and their chief complaint is that they can't find new workers that are creative. And as a former public schools teacher, and still someone with a master's degree in teaching, I know for a fact that we're not producing that at the grade school, high school level for a reason, because again, that corporatization agenda is there now through these neoliberal policies for public education. And so, yes, we're not getting that product. What we're getting is a very, for the most part, a very cut and dry type of student that's coming out. And this is in a general sense. There's still some very creative people out there, but we are not getting that critical thinking, creative type of person in the workforce. And that's because that's what we're doing. That's what we implemented for the last 40, 50 years with NCLB and race to the bottom. I call it race to the bottom. Not to
I've
the
heard
top,
that term before.
So
When I first went into a liberal arts degree at the University of Minnesota, one of the first courses that I took, and I think I can only imagine how different it would be as if if everybody got a liberal arts degree,
absolutely.
love it or hate it. Because to be quite honest, I hated a lot of it going into it, right? So I was taking courses. A lot of times I just felt like there was a very strong agenda. The professors, they were resistant to even hearing they didn't want necessarily to hear what you had to say. They just wanted you to hear what they had to say. But there was one course that I took, and it was in terms of debate, right? And the first project we had of the semester was write a paper on something that you strongly agree with. And I wrote this paper on something I strongly agreed with, was very passionate about it, just crushed it, a lot of citations, right? And then the next paper, and we had a month, it was like for the whole semester, right? Like 3 months, whatever. Each month basically had a new paper. We didn't know what it was going into it. Well, the second paper was write a paper to discredit everything that you just wrote. And I was like, what? Right? And it was a wild concept in that you had to, I wanted to get a good grade. So I did everything in my power to find everything possible to refute or discredit or just to break down the arguments of this other paper that I wrote. It was tough because I believed strongly in what it was. It was actually private security, because I had just came back from overseas from doing Department of Defense contracting with a private security company. And I felt in a lot of ways it was a benefit. Well, I wrote this second paper and it was kind of pulling back the veil. And it was frustrating and disturbing and concerning and all the things. And then the third paper, they said, okay, now take both of those and come up with your conclusion and finish off the real paper. And it was just mind boggling, the point, like how far I'd come in just a few months in just this one class doing that. You find the extremes and then you pit them against each other. And then somewhere in the middle, in the murky, muddy mess that is the truth. And that
Right.
truth, I think, is
and that process,
people.
that process takes a lot of time. Now think about it in terms of the current situation that we're in, and it makes a large group of us very susceptible to the legacy media mantras that are occurring, because we're not critically analyzing what it is that is actually going on. And so before we got on and did the recording today, what were we talking about? Also, we were talking about what are the countermeasures to that. And so one of the countermeasures that I see in that is dissemination of information. Another one is also keeping it local, because all politics is local, right?
Yeah.
And so by keeping it local,
locally, you're definitely not going to change it nationally or
absolutely. So you and I dialoguing within our own community about these issues, about the different points of these issues, or the different points of these movements is vital in of itself. We're just between each other, we're creating a certain amount of synergy. But at the same time, we're also keeping it quote unquote real. That's what keeping it real is all about. Keeping it local and having local activism and local information sessions with each other so that we can gauge and see what's going on versus having someone spoon fed it to us and just us believing what is going on, you know?
You know, the mainstream, they figured it out how to get people, you know, it's comforting to be around people that just agree and just talk the way, you know, they agree with the stuff that you agree in, but it's not necessarily right. And
Well, think about those two divisions or those two different ways of going about it. One is a belief system, which is just very simple to believe in anything, right? Because someone hands you the belief.
right.
The other is the thinking system that you actually have to process. That actually your brain, you know, takes up a lot of energy to think. You know, what is it, 40%? Is it something like that? For your yeah, you lose a lot of calories by thinking. So it's actually an arduous process that's physiologically draining. And so you have belief systems that are comfortable and you can do on the couch, and then you have these thinking systems that are extraneous.
And they're not necessarily even, they're not comfortable. A lot of times, you know, for example, watching the 13th, I know that there are people in my own network that they look at that, and there's some other stuff that I've shared where people have kind of fired back, or either in a private DM, just being like, yo, you really think like that? And it's like, man, just because there's friction there and it's like resistant to your own belief structure doesn't mean it's wrong. And it's
okay. So let's back up. So a couple of years ago, I actually grew up, like really grew up. So my mother, she died of pancreatic cancer, and so I left my job in June because she only had a couple of months left to live. And on the way back from my job, I was working out of state. I literally assessed the matter in the sense of saying to myself, who am I here for? Am I here for my pain or her pain? And when I got into the hospital, I remember a complete transformation on my part. I was going to be present for her, not for myself. I put my feelings to the side, respected them, put them to the side, and I was going to be present to her, no one else. What she needed was most important. She needed my presence to her pain and her. And I fulfilled that all the way to the very end. And then afterward was the grieving process for me. Now I can wallow in my misery and deal with it however I wanted it to deal with it. But stepping back and looking at this big picture, so I take a look at something like the 13th, the documentary, and I ask myself, okay, am I here to feel their pain, or am I here to see it, witness it, and then what am I going to do about it the next day?
action.
What are my actions to start making a dent on this? And doesn't mean that I'm going to, create 100 million march movement the next day, but just what is my daily action?
Local,
going right back to a very simple thing. And so you pick up the phone and you make a call and you do what you need to do. You go to the pantry house, you do the work that you need to do. You make that donation where you think it's actually going to make the most impact. You disseminate the information that needs to. Whatever action you pick, you're going to pick a local action, because you're not there for yourself. You're there for someone else. You're there to make remedies of a situation. And that's the way I find myself to be able to distance myself and not feel so bogged down by the situation and depressed. Instead, I work through it and actually put something into it. Right.
That's great insight. I had never realized that this old, ridiculous, horrible movie, A Birth of a Nation, was played in the White House and presented as some great thing. And it was within the last 100 years, not even 100 years, like the last 60 years or something. And to think that that was literally playing at the highest echelon of government within the US and presented as this magnificent film, for me as a filmmaker and a creative, is disturbing. And I don't know how anybody in my network or in anybody's network, knowing that, could possibly still stand by and just say like, no, there is not this systemic racism within the legal system or within, inequalities for law enforcement. Yes, there's a lot going on, and there's, a lot of it, I think it'll lend itself benefit through education, whether it's through bringing up communities, informing people, what have you. But I don't know, man. It's
well, by 1850, in a historical note, by 1850, the notion of manifest destiny of white supremacy had already been encased in this country by 1850. And there are letters all the way from the 1600s and on of how the push forward from the East Coast to the West Coast was this great manifest destiny of the white man conquering the savages and the earth, and creating a whole new civilization and that sort of thing. I mean, it's a gobbledygook of information that happened, that was literally in the letters of the politicians of the time from 1650 on.
What do you think would happen if suddenly, like, fast forward
in legislation and all sorts of places, you'd find this manifest destiny? You could Google it and you can see it, and you're like, wait a minute, that's white supremacy.
Well, now they call it The Secret, right?
Right. Well, but you can call it a different name, but it was manifest destiny up to a certain point, and like I said, it's very well archived, in the sense of where you can find it. But
well, speaking locally, and I know we've been chatting now for a little bit. Curious, here in the coming weeks, coming months. I know you're always busy, staying active, and doing what you do. Where do you see yourself positioning yourself or engaging, in the coming weeks and months? Whether in tune with the big movement that's happening for equality, or other.
Oh, well, I always do micro, macro, I always do big picture, little picture. I connect myself with so many people across the country to be able to obtain the information that I need in order to make a decision. In terms of where I will be 2 months from now or 3 months from now, I'm not sure, because I'm flexible. Whatever is needed at the time is what I'm going to put my work into it. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And it's just the best dance that I could play, and I keep it pretty free, I keep it free. One thing though that I am still pushing over and over and over again, we talk about, stepping back, resetting, re-energizing, and not allowing ourselves to get down by all of this business that's going on, is I still push the daily hatha yoga routine on everybody, because it's my favorite, or not my favorite, but it's been the most it's just the best way to reset, for me. Right. So hopefully, if I'm not just messaging hatha yoga. What I'm messaging is for folks to find a way to incorporate that in their daily lives, so they can reset and be ready for this challenge, whatever the challenge is. And because that's most important, right?
Yeah. Outstanding.
Yeah, you looked better too. I mean, the last show you looked a little bit in upheaval. And I know you were in the middle of the thick of it, right?
Yeah, I didn't sleep it was bad. Like, it was a couple hours here and there. Like, it was just, it was weird, man, when you got smoke from burning structures coming into your apartment.
But you think about it, you step back a little bit. You got that breath of fresh air.
I've been really focused on nutrition, I've been exercising a lot. I haven't actually done a whole lot of yoga, but I have been focused on just being present and gratitude, which, those are two things that, I think would benefit anybody. But yeah, the yoga is something that I intend on practicing more. for the current time right now, I've just been really focused on, one, getting the appropriate amount of sleep, stepping back, like you're saying. Like there's certain times it's just you gotta step back and reevaluate kind of what are you in the thick of, and do you need to be in the thick of it, or can you kind of be on the edges and just kind of participating as in the best way that you can. And that's kind of what I've been doing now. But I got something coming up that I'm excited to share. It's I'm trying to put a lot more thought into it and ask questions as opposed to push any specific narrative aside from trying to close a divide,
Right.
mentally and physically. So yeah.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, because a revolutionary, I would rather have a revolutionary in tip-top sharp shape, versus someone who's just down on life. It's been wiped out by it.
Knuckle dragger, just kind of trying to get through the day.
I got nothing for that, I mean,
Yeah.
to me that's a little bit, and this is going to be a little harsh, it's a bit of dead weight, so to speak.
Yeah.
I'd rather be fighting along someone who's got it together.
Yeah, definitely.
So I have to always be looking at myself and going, do I have it together? Am I in the best shape in all sorts of ways to tackle what it is that's coming at me and coming at us,
Mentally, physically, spiritually.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
Great.
Absolutely.
Well, Luis, thank you as always for coming on. I really thoroughly enjoyed this chat.
It's a lot.
Yeah, it is. But I got some more coming up later this week. I'm really pushing to dig into more of this stuff to facilitate these types of discussions, because they are necessary. And I think if you get too comfortable with just being in conversations that are like just telling each other yes because you all agree, then, or because you're digging too deep, then I don't see it very beneficial for myself to grow.
Well, what happens is you just start believing.
Yeah.
You're no longer thinking.
Yeah, I like thinking.
So do I.
Well, Luis, thank you again to all the viewers and listeners. All the information you can catch up on what Luis has been up to can be in the About section below. Until next time, stick around. We got more coming at you.